Should the Conservative Party give their top donor accused of racism his money back? Do the public want tax cuts or more spending? And should we pay asylum seekers £3,000 to go to Rwanda? This is Politics Live. Joining me soon, Conservative MP Jonathan Gullis, Labour MP Sarah Champion, Tatton Spiller from Simple Politics and Reem Ibrahim from the Institute for Economic Affairs. On the programme.
What he said here in a private conversation half a decade ago, he's apologised for. I don't think we need to spend too much time on that, but given he's made that apology.
This Tory donor is facing new racism allegations this morning. Should the party give the money back? Diane Abbott says she was frightened by Frank Hester's alleged comments. Should Keir Starmer bring her back into the Labour Party?
I would be very sad if Diane Abbott were to leave Parliament not as a member of the Labour Party, which she's been an MP for over 40 years.
This was a week ago, but has the budget improved the Conservative Party's poll ratings? And do the public actually want tax cuts or more public spending? And we'll bring you Prime Minister's questions live at noon. Well, as I said, we're hoping to be joined by Conservative MP Jonathan Gullis shortly. But let's start with this story in The Times. The headline, migrants to be paid thousands to move to Rwanda under new scheme. This is separate to the Rwanda bill, but the government is reported to be offering up to £3,000 to failed asylum seekers to move to Rwanda on a voluntary basis under this scheme. Welcome to you, Jonathan Gullis. I know you've literally just sat down. Yes, I want your apology in writing after the programme. What's your reaction to that story?
Well, look, first of all, I haven't had a chance to sit down with the Minister, so I want to actually sit down and hear the detail. But the story, as I've read it to date so far, is that the voluntary scheme is something that's been running for a long time now for people to return to their countries of origin.
But that's
different
because this would be
because we're talking about people directly to
yes.
Rwanda. Look, if the government thinks this will work, I'm willing to try anything and everything that we can in order to get those flights off to Rwanda. But I will be quite frank. Of course, I've got huge concerns about the fact that we'll be paying people to go to Rwanda when simply, if you've come here illegally and you've entered our country illegally, you should be immediately detained, held, and not allowed to roam, as has been happening from hotels, and deported immediately as well. And so the Prime Minister is working very hard, and I have seen from behind the scenes the operatisation of the Rwanda scheme going full tilt in order to make sure that we are ready to get people on planes as soon as we get this bill passed in order to demonstrate to the British people we are the only party in Parliament with a plan to stop the boats.
Sarah?
I mean, I saw this break last night and I actually thought it was a spoof. I mean, it's just getting silly now, isn't it? And even if the Rwanda scheme was operational, we're talking a couple of hundred people. We have taken more asylum seekers from Rwanda than we are sending to Rwanda. I mean, we haven't sent any, as far as I'm concerned, just ministers to go and spend our money. 400 million that's gone into this already. It's just bonkers. And let's be realistic about it. The returns of a failed asylum seekers are down 50% in the last 14 years. So it is not working. This is desperate and it's embarrassing and it's taxpayers' money.
Jonathan?
Well, first of all, I would say that if Sarah doesn't like the Rwanda plan and she's consistently voted against it, then what is Labour's alternative? Because the deal is already on the table with the French that we're working on. Has stopped around 26,000 vessels last year. We've already got the cooperation with Albania, for example. We've seen a 93% drop in the amount of Albanians coming illegally as well. We're obviously working further downstream. We're doing everything. We are going to introduce safe and legal routes, and we've got that in part of legislation that we passed recently. Ultimately, Labour's plan is to join this EU scheme, this quota-sharing scheme, that would see potentially 100,000 additional migrants come here who have already entered mainland Europe illegally. And ultimately, Keir Starmer is showing us that he will have a free movement system in all but name.
Is that Labour's plan?
I mean, part of it, but the main thing is actually go after the traffickers that are bringing people here on false hope. I mean, the other thing is that we need to be really blunt about, and this is a scoop because I'm not announcing it until tomorrow, £3.2 billion of UK foreign aid has been allocated to the Home Office for hotels for the next financial year. So I don't really see how your plan is working. I think if you went to any of my constituents and told them that, yes, you're getting a grip on immigration, they would laugh in your face. They don't believe it anymore.
Is it right that all that money is diverted from a foreign aid budget?
I've got no issue using the foreign aid budget. I don't want the foreign aid budget to exist at all, to be perfectly frank, because I believe that every country should determine how to invest their money year in, year out, and invest into schemes that actually work rather than force money out quickly, because we have to legally every year.
Although the Foreign Secretary might disagree with you.
Let me be clear, Jo, because it's also important. We've heard there about... Well, that's part of the scheme from Labour. Again, there is no actual substance of how they would stop the boats. When Yvette Cooper is holding up signs saying refugees welcome whilst the small boats crisis was happening, that sends a wrong signal to people in Stoke-on-Trent who, by the way, 73% voted to leave, overwhelmingly want to see us stop the boats, and have a Labour Party simply patronise them into believing that somehow this isn't important to them, when absolutely is.
Although you haven't stopped the boats, that's the problem.
But we also need to make a distinction between illegal migration and people that are coming here for asylum or as refugees.
So, sorry, you did make a fair point about traffickers.
So what about smugglers?
Let her finish.
Smugglers are taking people's money voluntarily.
Jonathan, let her finish.
Are we sending refugees from Ukraine back? No. We accept that there are some people...
It's a whole different scheme.
There are some people where it is unsafe, and what you're doing is merging the whole thing together.
No. Let's get our other guests in and return to this particular story that is reported to being considered by the government. Now, it's a new variation of the existing voluntary return scheme, which was mentioned by Jonathan, where failed asylum seekers receive financial assistance to return to their home country. But this would be £3,000 to go to Rwanda. Is it a good idea?
Well, this is a tale as old as the hills. This is a genie's promise. A genie asked Rishi Sunak what his one wish would be, and he said, I want to see a flight go to Rwanda. And he was thinking it's going to be a deterrent. It's going to show how strong we are as a government. We're going to win the election. But of course, we know the genie's corrupt. We know the genie is going to send a plane full of other people altogether, and that people have less faith in him, and it's a disaster for the guy. He can't claim anything positive from this. Oh, we've not sent anyone, so we'll send a completely different group altogether. Jonathan, you said that they should be locked up and deported, but the people we're talking about for Rwanda, I believe, are people who it's not safe to deport.
Well,
that's our...
some of them maybe, but they're failed asylum seekers. They're failed asylum seekers, people who have overstayed their visas, and foreign criminals.
Yes, but we can't send people back to war zones. We can't send people back to places.
Not a war zone,
well, hang on. Let me get Reem in. What do you think?
Yes, I think Sarah makes an excellent point that actually there has to be this distinction between illegal migrants and asylum seekers. The point is, as a result of Home Office failures, we don't know who those people are. We've seen over 170,000 people on the asylum seeker backlog. We have to ensure that the Home Office are actually moving through that in order for us to even decide whether or not those people are able to be reported in the first place. Now, the problem at the moment is that these sorts of schemes where effectively the government is saying, well, you know, even if the Rwanda bill still faces difficulties with the ECHR and still faces those legal challenges, actually here are people voluntarily choosing to go because they're receiving £3,000, and also the huge amounts of cost that is going to cost the Rwandan the money that they're going to be spending to the Rwandan government anyway. This is additional taxpayer money that just isn't going to work. And ultimately, we're saying to people, if you come here and your asylum application is rejected, then you can still get £3,000 and be sent to Rwanda. It's just absolutely absurd.
Well, respond just to that, on that point.
Well, I think I made it clear. I share those absolute same concerns. At the end of the day, if you come to this country illegally via a small boat, when you put money into the hands of smugglers, by the way, that means you're not being trafficked. You've chosen to pay tens of thousands of pounds to these illegal gangs in order to come over here. Then ultimately, we shouldn't be saying to people, you can also get an additional £3,000, especially when you see the disgusting videos of people splaying money in their 4-star hotel rooms who've come here illegally, when I've got mothers who are trying to escape domestic violence, I've got other people who have got drug and alcohol addiction, who are homeless, and one of our hotels housed those people that we had to then close to these illegal migrants that thankfully, because I've been lobbying, the North Stafford Hotel is now emptied of its illegal migrants in order to look after the very vulnerable people that we want to.
Well, and just a reminder that the Rwanda bill itself, this is about deporting asylum seekers to Rwanda to have their applications processed for them to stay there. That's finished in the Lords. It finished last night and will return to the Commons soon, as Rishi Sunak pledged to stop the small boats. Let's show you this headline in today's Guardian. Tory donors' remarks were racist and wrong, number 10. And at the bottom left-hand corner, Hester suggested staff climb on train roof. Now, this is the continuing controversy you heard again in the headlines. We discussed it yesterday over Tory donor Frank Hester's remarks about the MP Diane Abbott. The Guardian today leads on that headline that Hester's remarks were racist and wrong, according to number 10. They took quite some time to get there, but they've published further comments made by the Conservative donor, who said, addressing a number of staff members on a crowded balcony for the meeting at the TPP headquarters overlooking the railway line in Horsforth, Leeds, Hester asked if there was no room for the Indians then. He then said, climb on the roof, like on the roof of the train there. Maybe. Now, a statement from Phoenix Partnership said Hester accepts that he was rude about Diane Abbott. Amongst the alleged comments, he said, looking at Diane Abbott made you want to hate all black women. It was said in a private meeting, allegedly, several years ago. But his criticism, they said in the statement, had nothing to do with her gender nor colour of skin. I'm joined by the BBC's chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman. Henry, where does this leave the government?
Well, what a mess they got themselves into yesterday, Jo, because you just read out a statement from a spokesman for Mr. Hester there. Yesterday morning, the government was proactively adopting that defence, saying that those comments did not, or those alleged comments, did not have anything to do with Diane Abbott's race or gender. It felt like that position felt a bit fragile. It became basically untenable yesterday afternoon when Kemi Badenoch said that the comments as reported were racist. And lo and behold, a couple of hours later, Rishi Sunak, or at least a spokesman for him, said that he agreed. I think there's two questions today. One is, might the Conservative Party hand back the £10 million, which is obviously an awful lot of money that Mr. Hester donated? As it stands, they are saying no. But the other question, given yesterday's confusion, is about Rishi Sunak's judgment. And privately, that's what Conservative MPs are talking to me about, is how did they end up getting themselves into such a mess handling this yesterday, never mind the broader issue that those alleged comments raise.
Is there any prospect, real prospect, of the Conservatives handing back that £10 million?
As it stands, it doesn't feel like there is. Kevin Hollinrake, who's a government minister, was out on the media this morning and he said that they wouldn't hand it back. In fact, he said that if Mr. Hester offered another £10 million, the Conservative Party would take it. Andy Street, who's the Conservative mayor of the West Midlands, he's been the most critical of that position. He said that if the money had been donated to him, then he would think about the company he wants to keep and hand it back. But that's as far as we've got so far. Obviously, if other Conservatives, senior Conservatives, come out and say that the Conservative Party should hand that money back, then that position might have to shift.
There have been calls for Labour to return the whip to the MP Diane Abbott. What's happening there?
We don't know, is the truth. She's been suspended from the Parliamentary Labour Party for 11 months now over a letter she wrote to the Observer newspaper almost a year ago, in which she suggested, or she compared anti-Semitism to the kinds of teasing that ginger children might suffer in the playground. I mean, a lot of people found that very offensive and still would. But what's interesting is that as well as people on the left of the Labour Party who never thought that Diane Abbott should have been suspended or thought she should have been readmitted by now, you've also now got some figures from the other wing of the Labour Party. You had Harriet Harman yesterday, Ed Balls, both members of new Labour cabinets, saying that now might be the time to let Diane Abbott apologise and then hand the whip back. I think this row, because it does concern Diane Abbott, is refocusing attention on how the Labour Party has taken 11 months here to investigate an 8-sentence letter.
Henry Zeffman, thank you very much. Should the Conservatives hand back that money, Jonathan?
Well, first I want to make clear and reiterate the response from the Prime Minister that those comments made by Mr Hester were vulgar, disgusting and were indeed racist in the context that I've seen them as reported.
And did you think that in the immediate aftermath of those comments coming to light, allegedly he said them, or did it take you all day to come to that conclusion?
As I said, I've made it very clear what my position is. In terms of the money, Mr Hester is a private individual who's entitled to do what he wants with his own money. If he wishes to donate it to the Conservative Party, that's his choice. In terms of whether it's accepted or not, that's a decision above my pay grade, Jo.
But do you think they should hand it back?
And personally, no. Because Mr Hester has apologised. He's also now, rightly, getting publicly shamed all over the media. I suspect his positions in his many companies might be untenable in some cases for a long period of time. I hope that he does actually not just apologise to Diane Abbott in person, but actually makes a donation to a worthy cause with the many millions he has.
You just said you think the comments, if he made them, were racist, but you're still happy to take the money.
No, he who is without sin may cast the first stone. With the greatest respect, Sir Keir Starmer stood next to Jeremy Corbyn when the Labour Party was found by the EHRC. This is a very serious thing. Only the BNP were found guilty of this before, to have anti-Semitism rife amongst their ranks. Keir Starmer stood side by side and tried to make the man who led that Labour Party at the time the leader of this country. Sir Keir Starmer was given the space to say sorry and has said he's done an awful lot of work, which I think he has done, to turn around the Labour Party, albeit what we saw in Rochdale recently. So if Sir Keir Starmer's allowed to turn the Labour Party around and say sorry, why can't we allow another private individual to fess up to their mistakes, take the public humiliation and therefore move forward, and hopefully a lesson will be learned?
Well, do you agree with that, Sarah?
I mean, I think that Jonathan's on one today. And just... Right, so if you want me to do the Keir Starmer thing, then yes, we have members who have been thrown out of the party. I'm glad they've been thrown out of the party. I don't want that attitude, approach, vile racism in my party. I'm grateful that Kemi Badenoch was the one that did stand up and say it, but it pains me that it had to be a black woman that stood up and said it, and it should have been the Prime Minister. I take very seriously that in my title I am the honourable member, and I don't think the way that the Tory party and particularly Rishi Sunak have acted is honourable in this case. We are talking about a woman. You know, she is iconic in our history. She was the first black woman MP, and I'm very proud of that.
And should she be allowed back into the party?
Well, what should have happened on our side was when the investigation was called and she was suspended, it should have been swift, it should have been decisive, and she either should have been thrown out of the party if they deemed those comments to be anti-Semitic, or she should have been accepted back into the party. The fact that it's taken 11 months, that is not acceptable, and no other business would see that as acceptable.
And what should happen now?
On the money, I go back to that honourable point. Yes, you know, we don't know what all of our members, what all of our donors do, but when it is in the public domain that someone is alleged of making those comments, when you are accepting as a party that what he said was racist, if he said it, then I think you do the honourable thing, not least because we're running into a general election, which is going to be very, very controversial, contentious, and there is a lot of racial tension in this country right now, and not throwing that money back, not being honourable is only going to fuel that, and that makes me scared.
Just before I get Jonathan's reaction, should, in your mind, Diane Abbott be readmitted to the Labour Party now?
I think the investigation should be concluded now and a decision made.
But you don't have a view on whether she should be readmitted?
I didn't actually read the letter that she wrote, so I don't know.
Well, I mean,
what I would say is that from your summary, I don't think that's enough to permanently throw her out of the party.
OK.
So I think, yes, she should become back in the party.
You should. You do think that. Jonathan, you think the money shouldn't be handed back. Should the party accept any more money from Frank Hester?
Again, that's a decision above my pay grade. I'm a member of the Conservative Party. I'm not the party
But you have
chairman.
an
I'm not the
opinion.
Prime Minister.
You've been very vocal in your
Would you take more money?
And what I would say is, if Mr Hester wants to make a donation, that's again the decision that's been made by my party leadership. But what I will say is it would seem a perverse reward to give Frank Hester £10 million of his money back. I think that would actually be seen almost as a reward, if anything, because that's his money that he's chosen to give. So actually what I think again is that ultimately, and this is really important, Jo, he has been publicly shamed correctly
I'm going to come on
and
to
embarrassed, and he's going to live with the consequences of his very careless and racist remarks for the rest of his life. And he'll be forever known for this, not for anything else that he's done in for his companies or businesses before.
We'll pick up on the idea, should there be forgiveness? But your reaction?
Yeah, Yeah. So I think what's interesting about the sort of the comments that have been floating around recently is that actually, you know, there is this kind of hypocrisy in politics at the moment. We seem to value immediate reaction, immediate decisions, rash decisions, effectively, because they're seen as being more decisive. So I think that, you know, the Prime Minister actually taking the time to consider whether or not these comments were indeed racist, and I believe them to be racist, and I believe that they were absolutely disgusting and horrendous things to be said. Again, over half a decade ago, and he has apologised. So I think it really is up to the Conservative Party themselves to make those decisions. I think Jonathan's right. Giving him that £10 million back would effectively be a reward for making horrendous comments. But, you know, we live in a society in which racial division seems to permeate our culture so consistently. And I think we need to really take a look at ourselves and actually have these open conversations. But also, if somebody has apologised, instead of cancelling them and effectively saying that if you make one mistake, that you are forever going to be demonised for it, I think that's also wrong. We can have open conversations about it and be adults.
Do you agree with that final point?
I'm afraid I disagree to almost everything you've just said. I think if someone says something racism, it shouldn't be focus grouped as to whether it's racist or not. I think you should just recognise it.
If he said
recognise it. I mean, you know, like Lee Anderson, they said it was wrong, but they wouldn't say it was Islamophobic.
But he was kicked out of the party.
Right.
He lost the way.
Eventually.
But eventually. Mr Ali, Labour's Mr Ali, they went and campaigned the next day. They were knocking on the streets supporting him. And you talk about public shame, Jonathan. The state of Westminster is a national shame at the moment. We have racist people donating money. We have candidates who are racist.
Well,
we have people who make racist comments.
Yeah,
forgive me.
allegedly
Allegedly racist comments.
We still haven't independently verified it. Yeah, but anyway,
we have all these things going on, and you know, Starmer loves to just drop policies that he was taking along, and there's nothing to believe in. Sunak is watering down as much as he can, whether it's building 50 hospitals or building police numbers, but that's just replacing the police numbers. I run an organisation called Simple Politics. We talk to people every day. We're on social media. We're not Westminster-based. We're not Fleet Street-based. We just hang out and chat to people on social media. And people are so sick of this. And none of this surprises them. Tractor porn. That surprised people. People were surprised by tractor porn. But apart from that, none of it.
That's a reference. Yes, that's a reference. I think it was last year. I can't remember. So much has happened over the past few years. Let me just take our viewers through what happened yesterday in terms of how positions evolved, particularly on the Conservative side. Let's have a listen to the Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride, addressing these comments as reported by Frank Hester yesterday morning. Let's have a listen.
Well, it's clear that what he said was inappropriate. He has, as I understand it, apologised for those remarks. I think the critical point here is I don't think what he was saying was a gender-based or a race-based comment, but it was clearly inappropriate. He has apologised, and I think we need to move on from that.
Just a few hours later, this is what the former Conservative Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng said on our programme about the comments.
They're clearly racist, and they're clearly sexist. And I think Diane was right to point out the call to violence. I mean, even in a flippant way, is really inappropriate. So they were very stupid remarks. I don't know that they were said, because I haven't had independent corroboration.
But by the afternoon, Kemi Badenoch, as you said, Sarah, said this, or tweeted this, I should say, and she's the Business and Trade Secretary. Hester's 29 comments, as reported, were racist. I welcome his apology. Diane Abbott and I disagree on a lot, but the idea of linking criticism of her to being a black woman is appalling. It's never acceptable to conflate someone's views with the colour of their skin. Now, the Prime Minister's spokesperson had previously called the comments unacceptable and refused to be drawn on whether they were racist. But later on in the day, they said this. The comments allegedly made by Frank Hester were racist and wrong. He has now rightly apologised for the offence caused, and where remorse is shown, it should be accepted. The Prime Minister is clear there is no place for racism in public life, and as the first British Asian Prime Minister leading one of the most ethnically diverse cabinets in our history, the UK is living proof of that fact. It's a complete mess, wasn't it, yesterday?
I think the Prime Minister's comment at the end there was absolutely perfect to make the point that despite this disgusting comment that was made, this racist comment, again, allegedly made, I appreciate that we're waiting for independent verification, but he reminded the country, and rightly so, that he is the first ethnic minority Prime Minister of our great country. We have the most diverse cabinet.
Israeli was probably the first.
Well, I do apologise. Israeli is indeed correct, but the first, as he said, like Hindu and Southeast Asian.
But what does it say about Rishi Sunak's judgment? Hang on.
Cabinet.
What does it say about Rishi Sunak's judgment that we had ministers, it wasn't just Mel Stride, ministers out on the airwaves yesterday, sort of trying to say that these comments were not racist, they were unacceptable and they were rude. By the end of the day, they put out this statement. What does it say about the Prime Minister's judgment?
What it says to me is that the Prime Minister would have taken the day to look at all the information that was being supplied to him, to hear, who knows what conversations he had with who, but I'm sure he's been busy and his aides were busy talking to different people.
They were directed not to say what these comments clearly are.
I don't know who's spoken to who and say, well, you can say this. But ultimately, at the end of the day, ministers are accountable for themselves when they're on camera and they can say what they think and don't think. And we saw that with Kemi Badenoch on her own tweet. I think the Prime Minister is right to take a breath over the short period of time to look at the information that was supplied to him, to then make a decision. And he's made a very clear distinction about what he thinks took place. He absolutely called it out, and rightly so. And ultimately, Mr Hester has apologised. And now, and as Kemi Badenoch said, now must be the space for forgiveness. Again, he who's without sin may cast the first
Let me
stone.
just get a final comment from you, Sarah, on that issue. Kemi Badenoch did indeed say that, and Graham Stewart, the Minister, said that people shouldn't be cancelled. In fact, Reem echoed those remarks. Do you agree with that there should be some space for coming back from what was allegedly said by Frank Hester, in the same sense that Diane Abbott should be allowed back into the Labour Party or not? Should there be some room for looking again at these kinds of issues?
I think there always should. There needs to be accountability, though, first, and there needs to be a real acceptance of the impact of what your words have had. And I'm just seeing a Prime Minister who seems to be following the polls and the vox pops to make his decisions, rather than showing the leadership that we desperately need. And I just find it really sad that we're in this position. You know, this impacts on all of us. This is just one guy, but this is impacting on all of us. And there's an extremism strategy coming out tomorrow, and I'm really anxious about what's going to be in that, because I just think this whole division that we're seeing is going to be fuelled.
And that's a new definition of extremism that Michael Gove is going to outline tomorrow in the Commons. Let's talk about the budget, because it was a week ago today. Gosh, I can't believe it. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, cut national insurance again by 2p in the pound, which Labour supported, meant to be the big set-piece event to transform the Tory party's electoral fortunes ahead of a general election, whenever that actually happens. Well, let's find out if it's worked. We can talk to Kelly Beaver, who is from Ipsos Mori. Kelly, has it had an impact on the polls?
Well, let's just start with where the polls are. So we've now polled the Conservative Party at the lowest level we've seen them in terms of the proportion of voters in the UK who say they would vote for them. Only 20% were saying that was the case only a few weeks ago. So that's the position that they started in ahead of this budget. And also a very small proportion of the British population believed the Conservative Party had a long-term strategy for the economy of the country. After the budget, worth reflecting, it very rarely does move voting intentions. And in this case, we've seen no difference. What we are seeing is that only 13% of the British population are saying that they felt reassured as a result of the budget, whilst 4 in 10 are saying that actually they feel more concerned. And it hasn't moved Jeremy Hunt's own support ratings and whether people think he's doing a good job. We still have only 1 in 5 who believe that's the case. So at a macro level, not much has changed, but at the individual tax level, when you ask people about how they felt around national insurance or non-dom, we have a high proportion who support those changes.
And both Labour and Conservatives support, obviously, the idea of cutting those particular taxes. But what about the public? Do they have a preference for lower taxes or spending that money on public services?
So when we ask them this question, they're quite split in their response. We know that Conservative 2019 voters are more likely to have a preference for cutting taxes than they do investment in public services. But across the piece, when you look at the population as a whole, we're quite split. And what that tells you really is that the public do care about public services, but they also care about the amount of money in their own pockets. And this is going to be an interesting and challenging area for any new government, perhaps at the back end of this year, to navigate, because you cannot come out and say you're going to address improving investment in public services without recognising that it needs to come from somewhere. And 4 in 10 of the British population would say that they think any new government will need to raise taxes. So they're not, they understand that the money needs to come from somewhere.
Kelly, stay with us for the discussion. Jonathan, what do you think? When you talk to your constituents, would they like more money spent on public services?
I think my constituents are very clear that there is an awful lot of money going into public services, more money than ever before into our schools. And again, I spent my entire career as a school teacher before coming to Parliament, so I've seen the changes we've made on the ground. 92% of my schools now are good or outstanding compared to the 68% it was back in 2010. The NHS has now got a £160 billion plus budget. It's not about whether we need to give the NHS more money, it's about making the NHS more productive with the money that it has, investing in technologies in order to bring down paperwork and unnecessary HR stuff, getting rid of these ridiculous equality, diversity, inclusion people who sit in the NHS and take millions out of the system every year when we've already got functioning HR services in the NHS itself. And ultimately what people said to me about this budget was it was a budget for families. It was a budget for families because if you're a working parent, that 2p off your income tax on the average worker means you're £1,800 a year better off. It means as well with the child benefit changes that we've made, which is a huge transformative change, that one parent on 60,000, another one on 35,000 jointly will be £4,000 a year better off.
Although there's still an anomaly
to raise their children. That is fantastic.
Let's just set that in the context because, of course, taxes overall are still going up. They're still going up really considerably. So whatever Jonathan says about the reaction in the constituency to the 2p cut, that is the actual sort of backdrop to those cuts in national insurance. And secondly, yes, a 1% increase overall to public spending, but that will mean unprotected departments will see quite significant cuts unless the economy miraculously grows hugely over the next year or two. What do you think people want?
Well, this is the exact point. You know, I think that actually posing the question, do you want more money for public services or do you want more of your own hard-earned money, is actually quite a disingenuous kind of question to be asking. Ultimately, in order to improve public services, the answer is not always more taxpayer money being spent on them. We spend record levels of money on our National Health Service, huge numbers of people on waiting lists. They're about to peak at about 8 million in England alone. Ultimately, the solution is not throwing more of our hard-earned money into bureaucratic black holes. The solution is serious and meaningful reform. Now, Jo, you mentioned whether or not the economy will miraculously grow. I think what's interesting about the budget is the national insurance 2p cut will have an impact on working people, and in the short term on the cost of living crisis that will alleviate some of that burden. But if we're talking about tax cuts that are meaningful for economic growth, we haven't seen those in this budget, and actually I think that over the next few months we're going to be seeing further calls for a meaningful reshake of the tax system. You're absolutely right. You know, the solution is not necessarily going to be asking two different questions: if you want better public services or more of your own money. It's not a winner-takes-all kind of question. We can have both.
Right. Well, can you? What do your constituents want? There's very little, really, broadly speaking. I know there are a couple of different policies, although the non-dom's already been stolen by the Conservatives or taken by the Conservatives. Broadly speaking, your sort of support of the tax cuts is the same, and on tax and spend generally. What do your constituents want?
They want to have some money in their pocket by the end of the week, and they're not finding that. They want a system which works, and whether that is, sorry to bring it up, potholes sorting out because they can't afford to keep on paying for their suspension to be redone every few months, or whether it is being able to get an appointment with their GP when they need it. But also there are, and when I was last on, Tatton did a plug for his book. I'm going to do a plug. I've got a private members bill on Friday, which I'm colloquially calling the Buy British Bill. £300 billion of government procurement that could be going to British businesses. Only just under half of that actually goes to British businesses. And what I want to see is, as Reem rightly said, a rethink of what's going on. So there are ways, you know, none of my businesses want a handout. What they want is a contract. And the government, whichever colour, could be doing that. And I think that's what we need to be seeing. There isn't going to be more money. We're very committed that there aren't going to be more tax rises if Labour gets in. So we are looking at how to restructure that system.
Yeah, but should there be? But should there be? Is Keir Starmer right? Should taxes be going up on the better off in order to fund more in public services?
The only people, I was thinking about it after the budget on the way in, the only people I know that are better off now than they were 14 years ago are the very, very rich. There is, and the budget, looking at all the different sort of categories of people, there's a little group in the middle that might get slightly more, but most people are going to be worse off.
I just want to add to this point. My generation, Gen Z, the younger people, are really suffering as a result of this.
Really suffering.
And it's not necessarily just tax. I know I work at the IEA. We talk about tax a lot, but actually a lot of it is to do with regulation. And I think the housing crisis is the primary issue, the most important issue for the next generation. And ultimately, house prices are soaring to about 10 times, sometimes 12 times the average salary. And yet people in this country are unable to afford those homes because the government are actively restricting supply. It's economics 101. We want prices to come down. We need to increase supply. And government's perverse political incentives mean that actually we are restricting that supply. I think the solution is, yes, meaningful tax reform so that we can see economic growth, but also cutting some of that red tape to unleash innovation and growth.
Are politicians being honest about the choices that face them and face the country as a whole? The Institute for Fiscal Studies says there's a conspiracy of silence in not acknowledging the scale of the choices and trade-offs that will face us after the general election.
What's sad, Jo, is that are you being honest? Could have been about Rwanda, could have been about Hester. Now it's about tax. We've got this stink around of dishonesty where there's a lack of trust. People know we want growth. Everyone agrees we want growth. And certainly your lot, big fans of growth. Your lot, big fans of growth. Your lot, big fans of growth. Everyone agrees we want growth. So Wes Streeting says we need to reform the NHS, not just put more money in. Jeremy Hunt says we need to reform the NHS and not just put more money in. But this is the talk we've had for ages. The digitisation of the NHS, which you were talking about, has been promised for decades now, and it's cost billions of pounds, and it hasn't worked. We do need to think radically, but we need to get something done. And no one wants to pay tax. But you know what? I give blood, right? And the people who are giving blood have put lots of work into incentivising people to come. And they send lots of thank you messages, and they send you a text message saying your blood has just been used in Cheshire Hospital. And could we not have some kind of tax
for paying your tax?
Yeah, a teacher's just been paid. Using
teachers got a bonus as a result of your tax.
High five for my tax.
See, the problem with that is there is so much government waste. I think it's absolutely
it has to be selective. It can't be a civil servant was just paid for £20 to buy a light bulb.
Maybe you could get the job of sending out those messages to everybody that says your taxpayers' money has paid for this teacher.
Sign me up.
All right. You can talk to the politicians afterwards. Kelly, before we say goodbye to you, ahead of the general election, whenever that is, let's say it's in the autumn, could you see another tax cut coming down, and would that make a further difference or shift the polls?
So there are some people mooting that there may be another fiscal event in the run-in to the general election, and I think ultimately we don't tend to see major movements around budgetary events. When you look back over the long history of budgetary events, it very, very rarely moves the polls. It would need to be something quite significant in order to do that, and of course the public recognise ultimately they want to see improvements in public services as well. So with any changes in tax, it needs to be really clear about the spending plan for today, but also planning for public services in the future. Very few think there's a plan that will sustain public services in the future, and that's a major gap to campaign on in the next general election.
Kelly Beaver from Ipsos Mori, thank you very much for coming onto the programme today. And if you want to follow the polls closely between now and the general election, you can go to the BBC website. Here it is, General Election 2024 Poll Tracker. How do the parties compare? And they have done all of the digging in terms of the figures ahead of the election later on in the year. Let's have a quick look in the House of Commons chamber, because Prime Minister's questions will be with us in about 7 or 8 minutes' time. And yesterday there was a moment when the ex-Conservative Party Deputy Chairman Lee Anderson, who defected to Reform UK on Monday, crossed the floor of the House of Commons, you can see here, to take his seat on the opposition benches as a Reform UK MP. You can see him sitting there up at the back of those opposition benches. I don't know who he ended up sitting next to. Jonathan,
George Galloway.
Your reaction, was it another new MP elected to Rochdale? What's your reaction to Lee Anderson defecting to Reform?
Well, I'll give you an exclusive, Joe, because I've been told through certain members of the lobby that my name is one of these 9 being floated around by Reform UK. Absolutely not a cat's hell and chance will I be defecting. I joined the Conservative Party at 18 years old. I've been a councillor, I've been an association officer, I've been a regional chair, I've been a parliamentary candidate and now a member of Parliament. I'm not far off 36, and nearly half my life has been dedicated to the Conservative Party cause. Sorry, I know I don't look like I'm in my 30s. I appreciate that, but for me, it takes courage of conviction and belief to sometimes stay within something like a political party, where you have very different views within that and fight for what you believe in. I get very frustrated at times with some of my colleagues. I certainly would like to see certain things. You've heard me on your show, the New Conservatives, which I'm part of. We've shared our ideas of what we think we could do around immigration skills, but it takes real moral courage to stay in there and fight for what you believe in. Sarah did that during the Corbyn years, as did many other Labour MPs, including my predecessor, Ruth Smith. So I think that it is a shame. I don't think Lee had to go. I think working class values, particularly what my grandfather taught me, and he was a working class guy, who was, drove lorries, served in our Marines and served overseas, keeping our nation safe. He told me, if you're clumsy, to use Lee words, or if you get something wrong, put your hand up and say sorry.
Exactly.
And I don't see why he couldn't have found those words on the particular specific point around Mayor Khan being allegedly controlled by Islamists, which is simply not true. And I think it's therefore a knee-jerk reaction from Lee, one I think he will come to regret. But ultimately, we will find a Conservative candidate in Ashfield, and I'll be helping all my parliamentary colleagues and all my prospective parliamentary candidates, as well as myself, to make sure we return a Conservative government. Right.
Well, I mean, interesting comments from you, and very personal too. Do you think under Rishi Sunak's leadership, the Conservative Party does have those working class values that you have just talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will tell you one thing about Rishi Sunak. My son was taken into hospital when he was just over 1 year old, struggling to breathe when there was a viral disease, not COVID related, but another viral disease that was really a big epidemic at the moment, in that time in the NHS. I left the chamber. I told one whip that I was going home to go see my son in hospital. At 10 o'clock that night, I get a text message from Rishi Sunak. I'm not told anyone else, asking how my son is doing, checking in on me and my fiancée. The next morning, text me again. The next evening, text me again. Every day, checking in until I said he was out of hospital. That is the mark of man. I'll say the same for Sir Keir Starmer. On most Wednesdays when I'm in the chamber, if you look, I normally walk out with Sir Keir. We actually end up talking about football quite a lot, because I'm fully out of my upbringing.
Football.
But, these are decent blokes, and I appreciate in the politics, there is going to be the to and fro, but ultimately, we're all human, and I think that in the Conservative Party, you've got people like myself who may not be, have come from middle-class upbringing, but very much thanks to the success of working-class grandparents who did everything they could to give their children a head start in life, and my parents, and particularly my grandparents, made sure I kept grounded. And I serve a constituency that is, very much rooted in that working class tradition, and I'm very proud to do so.
Well, you say he's a decent bloke. Well, both of them, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. But is he leading the Conservative Party in the right direction?
I think he is. I think he's with the budget, for example.
Really? Because, I mean, you signed up to the New Conservatives, as you said, party, and we urge our colleagues to work with us to develop a bold new offer consistent with the spirit of 2019 that will convince our lost voters that we present a genuine alternative to Labour and the best hope for Britain. That suggests you are not happy with the current direction.
It's like any political party. The One Nation Conservatives had a conference not long ago. You've got Labour Together, I think, and other groups within the Labour Party that will produce ideas. Like I say, the New Conservatives is basically a think tank where we're trying to share different ideas, different policy perspectives. Things are costed. They're all out there in the public to be reviewed.
All right.
And we hope the Prime Minister, and by the way, he did adopt some of our ideas on immigration. He has adopted some of our ideas, 3 of them on the budget as well. So clearly the message is getting through.
What does the defection tell you about the direction of the party?
Well, it does tell us that there is going to be a battle for the heart and soul of the Conservative Party. Now, we saw in 2022 the leadership election, we saw effectively, 2 very different definitions of what conservatism means. And over the next year, in the lead up to the election, but also in a potential leadership election after a general election with a Labour government win, if the polls are anything to go by, then we're going to see this battle. And actually, I think that Lee Anderson's defection shows that there is this element of the fact that, these more radical parties that really are pulling towards these more radical ideas, especially on immigration, taking that hard line, seems to be more popular with certain elements of the party. I think Jonathan's absolutely right, and I think actually within the party there is going to be these kind of conversations, and I think it's great that there are these different factions that are having conversations about the future of the country, the future of the party and policy.
Let's have a look at this headline, Tatton. Will you welcome this? The Times, Boris isn't done. Why Johnson will still campaign despite Sunak betrayal. He might be on the campaign trail. He might be joining Jonathan Gullis and others.
Well, I mean, he is still box office. We still fall for him, and he will go round, and there are some people who will vote Conservative, I mean, because they've met him or that he's been in their town, that wouldn't have done otherwise. So whatever your thoughts about Boris Johnson, he's an asset to the party when it comes to polling.
Daily Mail, Sir Keir Starmer admits regret over his distant relationship with his late father, who gave up everything to look after the Labour leader's ill mother. Now, he's opened up a couple of times in interviews recently about his personal life. Is it having the desired impact?
I don't know if there was a desired impact. I think he's trying to be who he is, and it's very difficult when you're in opposition to actually get your message out. You know, you've got everything sort of stacked against you, and I admire him for doing it. I mean, I think that's as much as it is, to be quite honest.
I mean, do voters want to know all this sort of stuff about Keir Starmer, do you think?
I mean, I would rather us, and it ties in directly with the Boris Johnson thing, I would rather us move away from the celebrity and get back to what our values are and what our policies are and what we actually deliver on the ground. I don't know if that's possible anymore to go to Tatton. I think the genie is out of that particular bottle. But I would like us to be judged on what we actually do and what we actually deliver a lot more.
I thought, by the way, Jo, that interview was very moving. I think it's nice to see in part, because what I will say is, if you look at history, Attlee, Thatcher, Blair and Johnson all won sizable majorities because they had a bold vision, a bold set of ideas. Yes, some will have more detail than others, but had a very clear set of rules and convictions that guided them, and the public buy into that leadership. And they want to see bravery and fullness of thought, and that's what they get behind at the end of the day.
I don't think we see that with Rishi Sunak, unfortunately, and I think that actually when it comes to having this kind of conviction and genuine principles...
I'm going to have to leave you because here's Rishi Sunak.
Scandal is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history, and I'm determined that the victims get the justice and redress that they deserve. Today, we're introducing legislation to quash convictions resulting from this scandal. The Department for Business and Trade will be responsible for the new redress scheme, and we're widening access to the optional £75,000 payment. Hundreds of innocent sub-postmasters have fought long and hard for justice. With this bill, we will deliver it. Meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Abdul Khan.
Mr. Speaker, despite serious opposition from the Archbishop of Canterbury, 3 former Home Secretaries and 3 government advisors on anti-Semitism, social cohesion and on political violence, the levelling up secretary is due to widen the definition of extremism tomorrow. Whilst on the benches opposite, members peddle far-right conspiracy theories about Islamists and Muslims taking over Britain. Shouldn't the Prime Minister's priority be getting his own house in order and stepping out extremism, racism and Islamophobia from within his Conservative Party? And will the Prime Minister finally take Islamophobia seriously and agree to the definition?
Mr. Speaker, discrimination has no place in our society. And it's important to distinguish between strongly felt political debate on one hand and unacceptable acts of abuse, intimidation and violence on the other. I would urge him to wait for the details of the strategy. It's a sensitive matter, but it's one that we must tackle because there has been a rise in extremists who are trying to hijack our democracy. That must be confronted. And he talks about peddling conspiracy theories. I would just point him in the direction of his previous Labour candidate in Rochdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Armed Forces personnel who served their country for 15 years are eligible for the Long Service Good Conduct Medal, and similar medals are in place for those who make a career of serving in the police, the fire, the ambulance service and the Coast Guard. But as I learnt on a recent visit to Bournemouth Hospital, where I met the dedicated staff there, no such accolade is in place for the NHS. Would the Prime Minister please support my campaign to see if this anomaly can be corrected so the nation can formally recognise those who devote much of their working lives in the NHS to helping others?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is right that our incredible NHS staff deserve our utmost thanks for their service, and I'm pleased that many NHS organisations, as he knows, have their own schemes in place to do that. We also, of course, recognise NHS staff who are outstanding through our honours system, and MPs are able to acknowledge their work through the NHS Parliamentary Awards, and nominations remain open for that, and I would encourage colleagues to avail themselves of it. But I will make sure that he gets to meet the Secretary of State to discuss his specific proposals further.
We now come to Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the legislation on the Post Office scandal? Mr. Speaker, this week we lost the formidable Tommy McAvoy. He served his hometown of Rutherglen and the Labour government with loyalty and good humour, and we send our deepest sympathies to his wife, Eleanor, and their family. We also learned that the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead will be taking her well-deserved retirement. She has served this House and her constituents with a real sense of duty, and her unwavering commitment to ending modern slavery is commended by all of us. We thank her for her service. Is the Prime Minister proud to be bankrolled by someone using racist and misogynist language when he says the member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington makes you want to hate all black women?
Mr. Speaker, the alleged comments were wrong, they were racist, and he has now, as I said, the comments were wrong, they were racist. He has rightly apologised for them, and that remorse should be accepted, Mr. Speaker. There is no place for racism in Britain, and the government that I lead is living proof of that.
Mr. Speaker, the man bankrolling the Prime Minister also said that the member for Hackney North should be shot. How low would he have to sink? What racist, woman-hating threat of violence would he have to make before the Prime Minister plucked up the courage to hand back the £10 million that he's taken from him?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, the gentleman apologised genuinely for his comments, and that remorse should be accepted. But he talks about language. He might want to reflect on the double standards of his deputy leader, calling her opponent scum, Mr. Speaker. His shadow foreign secretary, the shadow foreign secretary, comparing Conservatives to Nazis, Mr. Speaker, and the man that he wanted to make Chancellor. The man that he wanted to make Chancellor talking about lynching a female minister. His silence on that speaks volumes.
Mr. Speaker, the difference is he's scared of his party. I've changed my party. And Mr. Speaker,
I want to hear both the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister invited himself into everyone's living room at 6 o'clock on a Friday evening. No one asked him to give that speech. He chose to do it. He chose to anoint himself as the great healer and pose as some kind of unifier. But when the man bankrolling his election says the member for Hackney North should be shot, he suddenly finds himself tongue-tied, shrinking in sophistry, hoping he can deflect for long enough that we'll all go away. What does the Prime Minister think it was about the hundreds of millions of pounds of NHS contracts given to Frank Hester by his government that first attracted him to giving £10 million to the Tory party in the first place?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm absolutely not going to take any lectures from somebody who chose to represent an anti-Semitic terrorist group, Hizb ut-Tahrir, who chose to serve a leader who let anti-Semitism run rife in this Labour Party. Those are his actions, those are his values, and that's how he should be judged.
Mr. Speaker, the problem is he's describing a Labour Party that no longer exists. I'm describing the man who is bankrolling their upcoming general election.
Keir Starmer.
They can shout all they like. 2 weeks ago, he marched them out like fools to defend Islamophobia, and now the member for Ashfield is warming up the opposition benches for them. And yesterday he sent them out to play down racism and misogyny until he was forced to change course. He won't hand the money back. He won't comment on how convenient it is that a man handed huge NHS contracts by his government is now his party's biggest donor. You have to wonder what the point is of a Prime Minister who can't lead and a party that can't govern. And Mr. Speaker, national insurance contributions fund state pensions and the NHS. So is the Prime Minister's latest unfunded £46 billion promise to scrap national insurance going to be paid for by cuts to state pensions or cuts to the NHS?
Prime Minister. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad he's brought up the budget. It's about time that he spoke about his plans, because what have we heard, Mr. Speaker, from the Shadow Chief Secretary? The Shadow Chief Secretary of the Treasury confirmed.
Sorry. Shh. Prime Minister.
The Shadow Chief Secretary of the Treasury has confirmed that the Labour Party will not be sticking to the Conservative government spending plans. So we now have a litany of unfunded promises on the NHS, on mental health, on dentistry, on breakfast clubs, and that doesn't even include the £28 billion 2030 eco-pledge that he's still committed to. But what we all know, Mr. Speaker, is that while we're cutting taxes, Labour's unfunded promises mean higher taxes for working Britain.
No, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party will not be sticking to his completely unfunded £46 billion promise. And he thinks he can trick people into believing that, but simply shaking the Tory magic money tree will bring it into existence. Let's be clear. 80% of national insurance is spent on social security and pensions. 20% is spent on the NHS. So he's either cutting pensions or the NHS, or he will have to raise other taxes or borrowing. Which is it, Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I know it's not his strong point, but if you actually listened to the Chancellor last week, what he would have seen is NHS spending is going up, Mr. Speaker. It's going up. It's a plan that's backed by the NHS CEO, who says that we're giving her what she needs, and at the same time, we are responsibly cutting taxes for millions of people in work. An average worker benefiting from a £900 tax cut, Mr. Speaker. But what I'm hearing for him is he's against our plans to cut national insurance.
The highest tax burden since the Second World War. I did listen to the Chancellor, £46 billion of unfunded commitments. They tried that under the last administration, and everybody else is paying the price. And 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister promised to crack down on those spreading hate. Today, he shrunk at the first challenge. Last week, he promised fantasy tax cuts. Now he's pretending it can all be paid for with no impact on pensions or the NHS. All we need now, Mr. Speaker, is an especially hardy lettuce, and it could be 2022 all over again. Is it any wonder that he's too scared to call an election when the public can see that the only way to protect their country, their pension and their NHS from the madness of this Tory party is by voting Labour?
Mr. Speaker, again...
No, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about pensions. Pensions are going up by around £900 in this year. It's this government that's protected the triple lock for the last 10 years. He talks about supporting working people. It's this government that's cutting taxes for every single person in work, Mr. Speaker. It's this government that's investing in the NHS, but all we have from him is a £28 billion unfunded promise. Mr. Speaker, I had a look at it. It's here. It's all here. Making Britain a clean energy superpower. He's still stuck to it, Mr. Speaker. And if you look through it carefully, there's billions in spending he's already committed to Scotland, billions for Wales. There's actually money for North London too, I noticed. But the problem is, none of it is funded. So why doesn't he come clean and tell him under his plans, Britain people's taxes are going up, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, millions of people around the UK and Europe have been inspired by the brilliance of Six Nations rugby. And Premier League clubs like Gloucester Rugby, which were funded during the pandemic through loans authorised by the Prime Minister as then Chancellor, have always been grateful for being kept solvent. But the Prime Minister will also know that the finances of some of these clubs are fragile and that the current loan repayment schemes could be crippling. So will my right honourable friend ask the Sports Minister and the Treasury to try and find a solution through this so that taxpayer interests are protected and all of us can go on being inspired by top-class rugby for years to come?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right that we stepped in with a £150 million financial lifeline to ensure the survival of Premiership Rugby League clubs during the pandemic. And I am told that DCMS is working with Sport England as the agent to talk to borrowers with concerns about their loan agreements, and any ones that do have concerns should contact Sport England in the normal way. But I can also proudly tell him that we are talking to the Rugby Football Union and the Premiership League to secure not just the future of Rugby Union, but also his local Gloucester Rugby.
We come to the leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I wish to begin by wishing Ramadan Mubarak to Muslims across these aisles. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party have accepted a £10 million donation from an individual who has said that one of our parliamentary colleagues in this chamber should be shot. Why is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom putting money before morals?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I said, the comments were wrong. The gentleman in question has apologised for them, and that remorse should be accepted.
Stephen Flynn! This is complete rubbish. The gentleman in question apologised for being rude. He wasn't rude, he was racist, he was odious, and he was downright bloody dangerous. Now, on Monday, the number 10 said, we've seen an unacceptable rise in extremist activity which is seeking to divide our society and hijack our democratic institutions. Isn't it extremism that we should all be worried about? The views of those Tory donors that we've read about this week.
Prime Minister. No, Mr. Speaker. There has actually been a rise in extremist activity that is seeking to hijack our democratic institutions. It's important. It is important that we have the tools to tackle this threat. That's what the extremism strategy will do, and I would urge him to wait for the Community Secretary to release the details.
Will Quins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sub-postmasters across the country will welcome the government's announcement today on the introduction of legislation to overturn the convictions of those who were wrongly convicted. But can my right honourable friend reassure this House that that legislation will be passed as quickly as possible, and we will support all sub-postmasters right across our United Kingdom?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, I want to pay tribute to all postmasters who have campaigned tirelessly for justice, including those who tragically won't see the justice that they deserve. Today's legislation marks an important step in finally clearing their names, and across this House we owe it to them to progress this legislation as soon as possible before summer recess so that we can deliver the justice that they have fought for. We're continuing to work with our counterparts in Scotland and Northern Ireland as they develop their plans, but regardless of where and how convictions are quashed, redress will be paid to victims across the whole of our United Kingdom on exactly the same basis.
And David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The future of children's cancer services.
And David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The future of children's cancer services in my constituency, across South West London, across Surrey, Sussex and beyond, will be decided by NHS England tomorrow. The existing service is world-leading and has saved the lives of countless children. Many of us who've engaged with the consultation process feel that a wrong decision is about to be made, ignoring risk to children's cancer care by moving them to the Evelina. If the Evelina is chosen tomorrow, will the Prime Minister personally intervene and delay any final decision until he's met with myself and concerned MPs across the House so we can prevent these risks to our children's cancer services?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman knows, decisions about clinical provision are rightly made by clinicians in local areas across the country. More generally, we're investing in more oncologists, radiologists and community diagnostic centres, which are contributing to cancer treatment being at record levels, but I will, of course, ensure that he and colleagues get a meeting with the Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Radical Islamists pose a serious threat to our nation's security. And I agree with my right honourable friend that we must urgently address this. But reports that the government wishes to broaden the definition of extremism are concerning because in separating the definition of extremism from actual violence and harm, we may criminalise people with a wide range of legitimate views and have a chilling effect on free speech. So can my right honourable friend reassure me that instead of trying to police people's thought and speech, as those opposite clearly wish to do, the government will instead target the specific groups that foster terrorism and those who fund them?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend makes a good point, and that's why the strategy that I would urge her to wait for will, I think, be one that she can support, because it is our duty to make sure the government has the tools to tackle the threat that she rightly identifies and highlights. And this is absolutely not about silencing those with private and peaceful beliefs, nor will it impact free speech, which we on this side of the House will always strive to protect.
Janet David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Children deserve the right to breathe clean air. However, many schools are in areas with high levels of air pollution. Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, has announced... Keep going, Janet. Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, has announced a pilot for 200 of London's most impacted schools to access air quality filters so children can breathe clean air in their classrooms. Excellent. Does the Prime Minister support this pilot and will he implement similar measures across our country?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that latest published figures show that air pollution has reduced significantly since 2010, and partly due to our targets, partly due to our legally binding targets to reduce concentrations. They will continue to reduce over the following years. And on top of that, we've also provided almost £1 billion to help local authorities across the country implement local plans to reduce NO2 and make sure that we can support those impacted by those plans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand the latest scheme that's been considered is to pay migrants thousands of pounds to leave Britain. Prime Minister, let's just leave the ECHR and deport them for free. So far, over 40,000 Brits have signed my petition with a Conservative post calling for us to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Will the Prime Minister commit to leaving the ECHR, or at the very least, have it in our manifesto to have a referendum and let Britain decide?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right that we must do everything we can to secure our borders, ensure that those who come here illegally do not have the ability to stay. That's why our Rwanda scheme and legislation is so important. And what I've said repeatedly, and will happily say to her again, is that I will not let a foreign court block our ability to send people to Rwanda when the time comes.
Liv Sewell-Roberts.
The National Theatre production, Nye, which stars Michael Sheen, celebrates at the end a transformational increase in life expectancy since the founding of the NHS. But UCL findings indicate that austerity policies between 2010 and 2019 are responsible for a 3-year setback in life expectancy progress. Does he, or the Leader of the Opposition for that matter, think public services can withstand an extra £20 billion of cuts?
Prime Minister.
Yeah, well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'm pleased that the National Theatre received significant funding from the Chancellor in the recent budget to support their fantastic work across the UK. But I am surprised to hear her raising the NHS when it's her party that's propping up the Welsh Labour government in Wales, which has absolutely the worst NHS performance of any part of the United Kingdom.
Mr. Speaker, may I thank my right honourable friend for meeting me 6 weeks ago to discuss the plight of victims of COVID-19 vaccine damage. And may I ask him, following that discussion and his very sympathetic response during the GB People's Forum to Mr. John Watt, who himself is a victim of COVID-19 vaccine damage, whether the government will be supporting my COVID-19 vaccine payments bill this Friday.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank my honourable friend for raising the issue and the conversation that I had with him previously, and extend my sympathies to all of those who have been affected by this. I will, of course, make sure that he can meet with the Secretary of State to discuss his bill, and as I committed to him, we are looking at the issue in some detail to make sure that the policies we've got are providing the support that they need to.
Marshal Cordon.
Speaker. The Prime Minister stood outside Downing Street saying that he wanted to root out hate and extremism.
Can you imagine?
Yet it shamefully took him more than 24 hours to finally say the remarks by the Tories' biggest donor that looking at the Right Honourable Member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington makes you want to hate all black women were indeed racist.
Yeah.
In November, the Prime Minister accepted a non-cash donation to the tune of £15,000 from Frank Hester for the use of his helicopter. So will he reimburse him, yes or no?
No, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased that the gentleman is supporting a party that represents one of the most diverse governments in this country's history, led by this country's first British Asian Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Later today, I look forward to voting for a tax cut for thousands of my constituents, a national insurance tax cut that will mean £900 off the tax bill for thousands of my constituents. After listening to the rhetoric from the leader of the opposition today, does the Prime Minister expect that the main opposition party will vote against this afternoon's tax cuts?
Well, my right honourable friend raises an excellent question, because whilst on this side of the House we believe in a country where hard work is rewarded and people can keep more of their hard-earned money, which is why we're cutting their taxes by an average of £900 each, we hear consistently from the party opposite, not only do they disagree with that approach, they continue to cling to unfunded spending promises that would put taxes up, but also the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, we learnt just yesterday, described our plan to end the double taxation on work as morally abhorrent. And that is a contrast between us and them. Labour will put your taxes up and the Conservatives will keep cutting them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of his backbenchers, and now it seems the Prime Minister himself, have taken to referring to the European Court of Human Rights as a foreign court, as if there's something inherently wrong with things being foreign or people being foreign. Exactly. In what way can a court that the UK has belonged to since 1953, which has an Irish president and a UK justice with an LLB from Dundee, be considered foreign? I think the House needs to hear the Prime Minister commit today to the UK's continued membership of a court and a convention which has protected our rights and freedoms for over 70 years.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the issue of tackling illegal migration, when Parliament expresses a clear view on what it believes should happen, supports that with legislation, and that we believe we are acting in accordance with all our international obligations, I've been very clear that I will not let a foreign court stop us from sending illegal migrants to Rwanda. That is the right policy, and in fact the only way to ensure security of our borders and end the unfairness of illegal migration.
Sir Edward Lee.
As a general election is not just a mere expression of opinion, but a serious choice, will my right honourable friend agree that there is only one potential party of government that has the will, the inclination and the determination to stop mass illegal and legal migration, and that is the Conservative Party? Let's unite our movement and do that.
I agree with my honourable friend entirely. And we know this because not only has the honourable gentleman opposite opposed the scheme, he's been clear that even when the scheme is implemented and working, he would still scrap it, Mr. Speaker, which tells you everything you need to know. On this issue, their values are simply not those of the British people. There's only one party that's going to stop the boats. It's the Conservative Party.
Thank you very
very much, Mr. Speaker. Under this Conservative government's watch, Thames Water have dumped over 72 billion litres of sewage into London's rivers, all whilst racking up multi-billion-pound debts. And reports are now that they could go bust any day. Despite this, the government is still refusing to publish their contingency plans for the collapse of our country's biggest water firm. So, yes or no, does the Prime Minister believe that Thames Water will still exist by the end of the year?
Prime Minister.
Yeah, well, Mr. Speaker, it wouldn't be right for me to comment on individual companies, but what I can say is that our ambitious storm overflow reduction plan is backed by £60 billion of capital investment. We now monitor every single storm overflow across England and have legislated to introduce unlimited penalties on water companies that breach their obligations. The independent regulator and the Environment Agency have the powers they need to hold water companies wherever they are to account.
Natalie Elphie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Later this year, a new digital EU border system will come in, and yet key changes that are required, key details, have still not been decided by the EU. There are urgent decisions that are needed on additional funding and preparation to keep Dover clear and Kent moving through with its traffic. Can my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, assure me that this issue is being taken seriously at the highest levels of government and that funding and support will be made available to keep Dover clear, support the residents of Dover and Deal and Kent, and to secure our vital cross-channel trade and tourism?
Prime Minister.
No, one of my friends is right to raise this issue, and I can assure her that it is being discussed at the highest levels of government between UK ministers and EU and French counterparts to make sure that we have practical and constructive solutions that will ease the flow of traffic in the way that she describes and will benefit her local communities.
Rachel McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 158 days and there's no peace and no justice. There is no food, there is no clean water, there is no sanitation and no medical aid. There are just no words left as disease is spreading and the death toll is rising, not least amongst children, victims of these atrocities. It is evident that the Prime Minister's plan is not working. So will he change track for the sake of these children and so many more and work to secure a bilateral, immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hamas?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've said repeatedly that we are incredibly concerned about the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Too many civilians have lost their lives and nowhere near enough aid is getting through. And in contrast to what the Honourable Lady said, actually the UK is playing a leading role in alleviating that suffering, just recently increasing the amount of aid this year to £100 million. Just today, 150 tonnes of UK aid is due to arrive in Gaza, and a full field hospital flown from Manchester to the Middle East last week will also arrive in Gaza in the coming days, staffed by UK and local medics to provide life-saving care. We are doing absolutely everything we can, working with our allies, to bring much-needed aid to the people of Gaza.
Show them report.
Mr. Speaker, now, will my right honourable friend join me in thanking the maternity team at the Royal Cornwall Hospital at Trelisk in my Truro and Falmouth constituency for all their outstanding work they've done to improve maternity services over the last few years? Their sheer hard work, along with the coming new Women and Children's Hospital, mean that there are now no midwifery vacancies in Cornwall, which I think you'll agree is a fantastic achievement.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for highlighting the improvement in maternity services at the Royal Cornwall, and she in particular is a tireless campaigner for reducing baby loss, and I commend her for her recent work on the introduction of baby loss certificates. And as she knows, we are committed to a new Women and Children's Hospital for my honourable friend's local trust in 2030 as part of the new hospital programme.
Sarah Dyke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Somerton and Frome, working together with the Langport Transport Group, submitted a robust strategic business case to the government in July 2022 for the reopening of a train station in the Somerton and Langport area, a train station that would connect over 50,000 people to the rail network, boost the local economy and support local people to reduce their reliance on their cars,
Almost 2 years on, they are still waiting for a response. So does the Prime Minister support this project, and can he provide confidence to my constituents that their hard work to drive this vital project forward has not been futile?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Conservatives in the South West are rightly championing the reopen of local stations, and actually recently Cullompton and Wellington will be one of the places that receives funding as a result of our decision on HS2. But it's because of that decision that we now have freed up billions of pounds of funding to invest in local transport across the country, and it will be local leaders that will be put in charge of that money to prioritise their local needs.
Final question, Mark Francois.
Prime Minister, in the 1930s, one of your less illustrious predecessors, Neville Chamberlain, so denuded the British Armed Forces of funding until it was too late that we failed to deter Adolf Hitler, and 50 million people tragically died in the Second World War. Russia has invaded Ukraine. China is threatening Taiwan. British shipping is being attacked by Houthis in the Red Sea. As the son of a D-Day veteran, could you please assure me and the House of Commons we are not going to forget the lessons of history and make the same mistake again?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his tireless campaigning for our armed forces, and he's right to champion them and the role that they play. And I agree with him wholeheartedly that sadly the world that we are living in is becoming both more challenging strategically and more dangerous, and in response to those challenges we must invest more in our armed forces. That is exactly what we are doing, with the largest uplift since the Cold War, and recently topped up with billions of pounds to strengthen our nuclear enterprise and rebuild stockpiles. He rightly mentioned the threat posed by the Houthis and Russia and Ukraine, and I know that he will be proud of the role that the United Kingdom is playing in both of those situations. We are respected and valued by our allies, but most importantly, we on this side of the House will do whatever it takes to keep our country safe.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
That brings us to the end of Prime Minister's questions, as announced by Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker. Let's welcome our guests for this part of Politics Live. For the Government, the Science Minister, Andrew Griffith, the Shadow Environment Secretary for Labour, Steve Reid, and Henry Zeffman, the BBC's Chief Political Correspondent. Welcome to all of you. Heated exchanges today, Henry. Keir Starmer attacking Rishi Sunak for rather belatedly calling the reported remarks made by a major Tory donor, Frank Hester, who was talking about Diane Abbott, racist. He called on the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, to hand back the money from Frank Hester to the tune of £10 million, to which the Prime Minister pretty well said no. And he obviously doesn't intend to in the future, because he said Frank Hester had apologised and showed remorse, and that should be the end of it. How uncomfortable was it for Rishi Sunak?
Pretty uncomfortable. I think we'd all have been shocked, and I suspect Rishi Sunak would have been shocked if Keir Starmer hadn't used that to take up the bulk of his questioning. I mean, also, it's worth noting, it's the first time we've seen Rishi Sunak on camera in public since The Guardian first broke the reports of the alleged comments by Frank Hester back on Monday afternoon. And Rishi Sunak used the opportunity to put in his own voice, as it were, what has been said by government spokespeople, be they unnamed spokesmen or cabinet ministers, over the last couple of days, which is what is now the position, which is that the comments, as described, were racist, but that more generally the Conservative Party takes his apology seriously and doesn't think, as a result, they should hand back the money. Rishi Sunak, I think, is trying to kind of draw a line under it there. And I think from that point onwards in Prime Minister's questions, he had a choice, which was to stay on the defensive or go on the attack. And he chose to go on the attack and try to throw it back to Keir Starmer with examples of other pieces of political rhetoric from Labour people. But look, clearly that was an uncomfortable session of Prime Minister's questions.
And just to remind people of some of what Frank Hester is alleged to have said, he was talking about Diane Abbott, the MP for Hackney. She was in the chamber listening to this row going on between Keir Starmer and the Prime Minister. But the Tory donor allegedly said she made him want to hate all black women. Now, you've concluded, finally, Andrew, that the comments were racist, but you're still happy to keep the money.
Well, the Prime Minister was unequivocal. All Conservative colleagues have condemned this. The Prime Minister was clear it was racist. It's not just that, but also the fact that the individual talked about killing a Member of Parliament. The Prime Minister rightly, and I think all of us would agree, that we need moderation in language. It's always important in public life. But also, even members of this House, including members of Sir Keir Starmer's current shadow cabinet and the former Chancellor, John MacDonald, who talked about lynching a Conservative female Member of Parliament. So it's really important, and I think the Prime Minister, the first Asian British Prime Minister, the first Black Home Secretary, all of us need to call these things out, which has unequivocally happened and has. You'll try and play parlour games with what different people have said, but there has been a consistent condemnation of these remarks over the last 36 hours.
Why not hand back the £10 million from someone you've agreed made racist remarks?
Well, the individual's a private individual. They've not been convicted of anything. They've made a clear and sincere apology. And the Prime Minister's clear that, that has been accepted. There's room for redemption and forgiveness in the public system. But what you can't do is be unequivocal about these remarks. They are wrong. The Prime Minister, we heard, very clearly was wrong. And actually, most of the time wasn't spent on that because Keir Starmer quite quickly backed off. And then most of the exchange was about the economy on a day that we're seeing the economy grow. And the Parliament this afternoon will be voting for a reduction in national insurance.
It wasn't. You can try and deflect from it. And most of it was about this important issue. But, Steve, does Andrew have a point in terms of forgiveness, a sincere apology, move on?
Well, if I'm pleased to hear that Andrew admitting that the comments were racist. It's abhorrent for somebody to advocate violence against anybody, let alone an MP. And that MP, Diane Abbott, has been subject to more racist abuse on social media than any other MP. But I wonder how the Conservatives think every black woman in the country feels, anybody that cares about equalities, when Hester is able to get away with comments like that, donate £10 million to the Conservative Party, and the Conservatives decide that the money is more important than morality, so they accept it. It's Kwasi Kwarteng and Kemi Badenoch have both said this was racist. Andy Street, the Conservative mayor of the West Midlands, says the money should be paid back. You should take a moral position on this. You should call out extremism and pay back this money, because accepting money from a man who makes comments of that kind shows that you are prepared to compromise on the violence he is advocating and the racism that he said.
Andrew?
Well, there was no equivocation in terms of what the Prime Minister said, what Conservative colleagues have said, what I've repeated
Andrew,
again
the equivocation
here
is in not paying back the money.
Today.
That is equivocation.
Those remarks have only come to light in the last 36 hours. You didn't know about them. I didn't know about them. The Guardian didn't know about them. No equivocation whatsoever. Those remarks are wrong, as are the remarks that have been made by serving members of Parliament in your party.
And which have not been.
It's not about deflection. This is an individual citizen. These are members of Parliament who have been elected. And Keir Starmer tried to make a virtue of his party having changed. But actually, some of these are serving members.
I will come on to Labour. But Andrew, why are you going to accept any further donations from Frank Hester?
Well, I think that's a hypothetical question. I'm not going to answer hypothetical questions. I can't believe that they're being offered. So.
Well, Kevin Hollenrake, another minister, said, well, actually, the party would be prepared. So do you agree with him or not? Or do you agree with Andy Street? It should be handed back. You certainly shouldn't accept any more. Who's right?
Well, it's a hypothetical question. The Prime Minister has been very clear these remarks are wrong.
But that's not the question I'm asking,
The individual has apologised. He's a private individual. He hasn't been convicted of an
So you can say what you like, and if you apologise immediately, then all is forgiven.
Well, there are processes. So when any political party, and Steve knows this because his party would do exactly the same as would any of the other major parties, donations to political parties are regulated, and at the point a political party receives a donation, not subsequently, not with hindsight, but at the point it's received, parties go through, I think, a very thoughtful process. I'm sure Steve's party,
you don't need a process.
The same.
You don't need a process when a donor has called for a serving member of Parliament to be shot because she's a black woman. It's crystal clear. It's crystal clear to me. It's crystal clear to most viewers, I suspect. It's crystal clear to Andy Street. What is wrong with you? And what is wrong with Rishi Rishi Sunak that he is too weak to do the right thing.
Well,
the same man that put Lee Anderson as deputy chairman.
All right, well, let's
there is a blind spot here. There was
the rhetoric, and this is a man who was sitting next to Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, who's called another serving member of Parliament scum. Now, should Keir Starmer...
Deflection isn't going to get you off the hook.
Well, hang on, Steve, answer that question, though. I mean, she did use that term.
She did use that word.
She did apologise for it. More broadly...
In that case, an apology enough?
Well, she's not donating money. You've taken £10 million off a man that called for somebody to be shot.
All right. Let me...
member of Parliament as opposed to one of many millions of private citizens.
All right, well, let's talk about Diane Abbott, because she is, of course, the focus of these comments. Frank Hester said he apologised and his apology wasn't a confirmation of the quotes that we have outlined. But let me just show you this from the Huff Post. Exclusive. Labour has no plans to end Diane Abbott's suspension from the party because she doesn't sit at the moment as a Labour MP. She had the whip taken away last year after she said Irish, Jewish and traveller people were not subject to racism all their lives. Now, she withdrew those remarks and apologised for any anguish caused. Has the Labour Party been too tough on Diane Abbott?
No, there was a complaint made and there was an independent investigation into that complaint, and it should continue. It's right that it should, but there's no connect... Well, I mean, whether you do or don't agree with
I'm just
Diane's
asking,
politics,
though, about... because
nobody should be subject to the kind of abuse that she's been subject to.
Of course not, but what I'm asking you is that Harriet Harman and Ed Balls and now on our programme, Sarah Champion, Labour MP, all saying it is time that she was readmitted to the Labour Party. Should she be?
Well, part of the Labour Party dealing with the extremism that we used to have in our party was in setting up an independent complaints process without political interference, and that is the right thing to do. The Conservatives are not tackling the extremism in their party if they're prepared to take £10 million from somebody who calls for an MP to be shot because she's a black woman.
Right. I mean, Harriet Harman, just to return to this issue, she said last night, I don't like to second-guess Labour's complaints procedures, but I would be very sad if Diane Abbott were to leave Parliament not as a member of the Labour Party. I'd like to see it resolved, and I hope it can be resolved in a way, as I said, which has Diane Abbott back in the party. Now, just on resolving it, shouldn't that have been done by now? It's been about 11 months, I think.
Well, I sympathise with that, and I'd like this to be resolved quickly for everybody's sake. I mean, whether you do or don't agree with Diane Abbott, she is a trailblazer. She was the first black woman MP in our country. She's put up with incredible abuse because of who she is, not because of what her political views are. Nobody should be subject to that. But the process needs to go through all the stages that it needs to go through.
Yeah, but why is it taking so long? Sarah Champion said it's gone on far too long.
I do very much hope that this can be resolved quickly, but this is not... This is a separate issue from the abuse that Diane is being subject to by this Conservative donor.
Let me return to the time it took yesterday. There was a sort of evolution of what ministers were sent out to say early yesterday morning about these alleged comments by Frank Hester and how they evolved over the day. In fact, Andrew, you're probably thinking you're lucky to be on today rather than yesterday morning when ministers were instructed to say something else.
Yeah, yesterday what ministers were doing, including Mel Stride, who's a cabinet minister, was actually adopting the language of Frank Hester's apology. And it's worth, since Andrew and Steve were discussing it, it's worth noting what Frank Hester has apologised for. He said he's deeply sorry. He said he's tried twice, as of yesterday at least, maybe more now, to get in touch with Diane Abbott to personally apologise. But he said he's apologised for being rude and that he nevertheless insists that his comments were not about Diane Abbott's race or about her gender. That's now clearly not the government's position. And Stephen Flynn, who's the SNP leader in Westminster, identified that in his questions to Rishi Sunak. He was pointing out that the apology that the government is using to try to move on from this and say, look, contrition should be the order of the day, he's apologised as a private figure, as Andrew's been saying. Well, actually, what the way the government are now characterising his alleged comments is different to the way that, as far as we're aware, Frank Hester is characterising them in his public statements.
Should Frank Hester apologise for making racist remarks, not just for being rude?
Yes. I mean, they're racist remarks. And the second point about threatening, even if it's a casual form of language, and he regrets that. But in this very toxic public debate that we have. I deplore Steve trying to score political points, because at the end of the day, we all need a parliament that functions. We all need people in public life that feel safe from being threatened. We'll hear more over the course of the week about how we try and build consensus around that. So, yeah, for sure, he should apologise, and not just for
how is it
for the
casual
fact
to
that it
call
was
for somebody to be shocked?
The fact that it was.
I just don't understand that. You said casual comment. He said she should be shot. In what way, on what planet is that a casual thing?
Well, I'm not defending it in the slightest.
You said it was casual.
No, I'm not saying that. That's not right, Steve.
Just said it.
I'm not saying that. I said even if he said it's casual, he should apologise, because it is wrong, and we can't run our public life with people making threats against members of Parliament, just as it is wrong if people seek to attribute characteristics to people based on their race or their gender or any other group characteristic.
Why were ministers sent out yesterday to inhabit the language used by Frank Hester, to apologise for being rude, that the comments were unacceptable, and that it took all day after the business secretary, we can show her tweet again, Kemi Badenoch, had to say those comments, as reported, were racist. I welcome his apology. Abbott and I disagree on a lot, but the idea of linking criticism of her to being a black woman is appalling. It's never acceptable to conflate someone's views with the colour of their skin. Why was that not sent by ministers when they were sent out on the airwaves yesterday morning?
Look, not a single minister condoned these comments, defended these comments.
It's not the same as saying they're rude and unacceptable. It's not the same as saying they're racist.
Well, people will go through chronology. I mean, you take 20 people, you get 20 different versions of what people will say. Nobody defended these comments. Nobody said they were right. Nobody said they were acceptable. You can pass individual language.
Well, let's listen to what Mel.
Nobody said they were acceptable.
Let's just listen to what Cabinet Minister Mel Stride said.
Well, it's clear that what he said was inappropriate. He has, as I understand it, apologised for those remarks. I think the critical point here is I don't think what he was saying was a gender-based or a race-based comment, but it was clearly inappropriate. He has apologised, and I think we need to move on from that.
Inappropriate. And he's apologised, but not racist. It wasn't until after we heard from the former Conservative Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, on the programme In Your Seat, in fact, when he said this about Frank Hester's comments.
They're clearly racist, and they're clearly sexist. And I think Diane was right to point out the call to violence. I mean, even in a flippant way, is really inappropriate. So they were very stupid remarks. I don't know that they were said, because I haven't had independent corroboration.
What does it say about Rishi Sunak's judgment that he couldn't say that, couldn't send ministers out to say, use those words for what they are until, well, late into the afternoon, evening, until, in fact, he'd heard from both Kwasi Kwarteng and Kemi Badenoch?
Well, look, we don't know what else the Prime Minister was doing. He had the chance, once a week, he has the chance to come to the House of Commons, say in the public pulpit his position on these issues. He's asked about them. That's rightly the forum for accountability. And there was no equivocation at all. So we can go through exercises of looking at VTs from lots of different people at different points in time. The Prime Minister was unequivocal. And I challenge anyone to say that the first Asian British Prime Minister sitting on the front bench with the first black Home Secretary in any way did anything other than damn these remarks and accept that they're racist and gendered and they're unacceptable.
I mean,
there was no equivocation about that. You could play the clip.
And we've discussed it at length.
Time and time again, and I don't think any of your viewers would have any ambiguity about where the Prime Minister...
We all know what people like Andrew and Mel are having to do coming out on the media, and that's defend a Prime Minister that's too weak to lead and who has decided to prioritise money over morality. I believe you've been morally compromised by this. I don't believe for a minute
I was equivalent, Steve. I was unequivocal, Steve.
But the reality of it, that money should be paid back if you think what that man said was wrong. It was race-based and it was advocating violence.
Steve,
it's unacceptable in politics, as you just said.
Right, but Steve, have you ever made remarks that you regret? Have you ever said anything in the public domain about individuals
that
you have?
Of course,
right.
yes.
So there is room, is there, for some forgiveness or space if people
of course there is.
Right.
But in accepting the forgiveness from this man wants forgiveness, they should give that money back. Because by accepting money from a man who has said what he said, advocating violence against a sitting member of Parliament.
But that's exactly
it appears
what your
it's condoning
former
what's going
Shadow
on.
Chancellor did, Steve.
No.
That Sir Keir
Would you
Starmer
accept more money from this man? And if you wouldn't, you should pay back this funding.
On his team.
Right.
Point is about.
Well, they've said they're not going to return the money, and people will make a judgment.
Well, that's what
people
they're
will
saying
make.
now. Let's see how this moves
that
over
may
the next
change.
24
People
hours.
will make a judgment.
I wouldn't be astonished
but
at all if
the
in
reason
the
I
end they
raise it, though, Steve, is because in 2020 you talked about Conservative donor Richard Desmond as a puppet master, and you apologised unreservedly.
I did.
And you expected, therefore, to be forgiven for making those remarks that you thought were wrong.
I didn't know his religion at the time, and as soon as that was pointed out to me, I could see how it could be misinterpreted. So, of course, I apologised. I've taken a very strong stance all my political career against anti-Semitism. I helped to set up an organisation that exposed anti-Semites and kicked them out of the Labour Party.
And should that be extended to Diane? And should that be extended to Diane Abbott?
Well, there'll be an investigation into what Diane Abbott said and did.
Right, but in terms of extending forgiveness and that idea of apologising, should that be consistent in terms of what people say? Judgment calls about your language is worse than mine is corrosive, isn't it?
This is about donations being made to a major political party by somebody who is making violent and racist comments, not just about a British MP, but about all black British women. It's not acceptable. If we want to take this kind of extremism out of politics, as everyone around this table believes that we should.
Since you've mentioned extremism, I mean, the atmosphere at Parliament, as has been demonstrated, not just by the tragic murder of 2 MPs, but also the rise in threats to MPs in general, which was raised by Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker. The Prime Minister says there's a rise in extremism that is attacking our democratic institutions, rightly or wrongly. There's going to be an announcement about redefining extremism. What are we expecting to be actually tackled here when everybody clearly is operating in a pretty toxic environment?
I think it's going to be quite a big moment tomorrow, actually. It was meant to be the big moment of the week, although quite a few political news stories have intervened for now, at least. So there's a current definition of extremism, which is vocal or active opposition to British values. And we don't know exactly the wording of the new definition that we're expecting to be unveiled by Michael Gove, the Community Secretary, tomorrow. But we think it's going to broaden that definition. It's going to talk about people who undermine liberal democracy, as well as the rights or freedoms of others. Now, that's obviously playing into a debate that is very live for all the reasons you suggest, though there are some people in government who say it's also an overdue tidying up because the existing definition is quite old. It's interesting in a few ways how different people will respond, because you've already had some criticism from people on the right of the Conservative Party who've warned that it might inadvertently capture anti-abortion campaigners, for example, or gender-critical campaigners. But then also, where the Labour Party go on this is going to be really interesting. And actually, the very first question of Prime Minister's questions was Afzal Khan, who's a Labour backbencher. He was expressing very strong scepticism, I think, to say the least, of where he thinks the government is going to go on this. And also, in passing, though he didn't really ask about it, Keir Starmer, in one of his questions, mocked Rishi Sunak's speech about extremism outside Downing Street a couple of weeks ago. So I think the debate tomorrow on this is going to be really interesting.
And we'll certainly be discussing it tomorrow ahead of that announcement. This headline in BBC News, ex-Home Secretaries, 3 of them, Conservatives, warn against politicising extremism. If they're worried about politicising extremism, and I think it was Sajid Javid, Priti Patel and Amber Rudd, who represent a sort of spectrum on the Conservative Party, why are you going ahead with redefining it?
Well, I don't think anyone should approach this in a sense of anything other than trying to find a careful balance. But also, we've got to look at the status quo. And the status quo is that 2 weeks ago, the standing orders of the Parliament, of our democracy, the thing that holds the executive to account, the Speaker felt he had to suspend, we don't know what Keir Starmer said, but he had to suspend because of threats against members of Parliament, intimidation that's going directly to the heart of democracy. So it won't be easy.
No, but is Rishi Sunak politicising it?
I don't think, of course, I don't think he's politicising it. I think he's trying to find a way forward because of what we have seen, because of the difficult and the often toxic debate, and the one thing we can all agree is that we all need to make sure that our language is moderate and acceptable, and that we can find sensible ways forwards to discuss issues in the cradle of democracy.
Well, you know, I think the right to protest is a fundamental right in any free democracy, but some of the protest has become illegitimate. You know, some MPs have had protests outside their house, including me. They seem very extreme, the people that are out there. They've caused huge distress to members of my family. We're having screaming matches with my neighbours who are trying to tell them to stop frightening their children in their own homes. That is not legitimate protest. That is illegitimate harassment and
there are laws to deal with that.
Well, the laws seem quite weak because we were trying to get the police to come and they didn't even turn up until these people had gone. And still there's been no process against the individuals responsible for that, even though some of them were identified.
So will you support this redefining of extremism?
I want to defend legitimate protest, but I do not think we want intimidation and harassment in our politics. We need to look and see what it says.
All right, thank you to all of our guests. And we will be discussing this attempt to redefine extremism on tomorrow's programme. So please join me at 12:15 here on BBC Two. And, of course, you can watch on the BBC iPlayer. From all of us here, bye-bye. Have a good afternoon.